Hi, this is David, and this is a short thought for the day. Today I'm studying from John chapter 6. It's the story of the Lord Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, most of us are pretty familiar with this story, but do you remember the background information, what led to this event? Jesus had just recently been told by messengers of John the Baptist's death. John was put to death by King Herod. Now, this news, while it was not unexpected, the Lord probably knew this, okay? Nonetheless, it hit Jesus hard. John was the forerunner to Jesus, the one that was to make the path straight, the one that was to turn the hearts of Israel back towards God in anticipation of the coming of the kingdom of heaven. And so now, with the forerunner being dead, Jesus knew that, he knew that his time was short as well. But there was another angle, too, to John's death and how it affected Jesus, because as we learn in the Bible, Jesus and John the Baptist were probably cousins, sort of. We know that John's mother, Elizabeth, was a relative of Jesus' mother, Mary. And so it was a personal loss. And so Jesus on this day decides that he and the disciples should go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, the side opposite of Capernaum. And there up in that mountainous region, Jesus was going to go and seek some privacy and contemplate the loss of John and think about John's life. And also probably as well, he would probably reflect on what lay ahead for him as well. And so they cross the Sea of Galilee, and lo and behold, they get to the other side, and gosh, there's a multitude of people waiting for them, which this probably frequently happened with Jesus when he crossed the Sea of Galilee, because the Sea of Galilee really wasn't very big. It wasn't a sea as you would think of a sea. It was actually a small lake. And it was pretty easy for anyone on the Capernaum side to run around the corner or the edge of the lake and to the other side. In fact, it was possible, if you could run fast enough, that you could beat the boat going across the sea. And so once they're on the other side with the Lord as a big multitude, and they've got quite a few sick people in their numbers, Jesus does what Jesus always does. Jesus begins to heal people. Jesus begins to encourage people. Jesus begins to be the shepherd that these people need. Now, Matthew's gospel tells us that as the day came closer to an end and it was about evening time, that the disciples made mention to the Lord, Lord, it's getting late. Why don't you just dismiss these people so they can go into the villages and buy for themselves food? Well, Jesus' response to them in Matthew's gospel is simply this: you feed them. And so I suspect they went out in the crowd then trying to figure out who had food, what food that they had, what resources they had to work with. Now, meanwhile, back in John's gospel, Jesus uses this precise moment as a time to test the faith of one of the 12, and it is Philip. Jesus poses the following question to Philip. He says in verse 5 of John chapter 6, Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? Good question, right? We're told in the very next verse that Jesus said this to Philip that he might test him. Sometimes the Lord tests us just like he tested Philip. You see, Jesus wanted to find out whether Philip would try to solve this massive problem, because it was a massive problem, okay? One that you really couldn't give a human solution to, okay? Because it wasn't just feeding 5,000. It was more like feeding 10 or 12,000, because the 5,000 was only the men that were there. There were probably at least another 5,000 women and children there too. A lot of hungry stomachs to fill. How would Philip do it? Well, Philip took the bait, and he very quickly reaches the conclusion that most of us would reach. And in the very next verse, in verse 7, Philip answers Jesus and says, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. Reality is set in on Philip. Well, Philip has kind of failed the test. The answer was for him to turn to Jesus and say, Lord, I know that you can feed them. Whenever you are confronted with a situation that really and truly you just can't find a solution to, who do you turn to? Do you continue to agonize over it, lose sleep over it, become anxious about it, simply because you can't solve the problem? Because this is the lesson for us today, and the thought I want to leave you with today. There are some problems that are just too big for you to solve. What will you do when you find one of those problems? Will you turn to the Lord and commit what resources you have to Him? Or instead, will you just simply flounder around knowing that you can't solve the problem? Now, in the case of our story here in John chapter 6, a small child has a lunch. It has 2 small fish and 5 barley loaves. And what does the Lord do? Well, after He blesses them, He gives them to the disciples. They distribute it to the crowd, and supernaturally, it just multiplies. In fact, they have so much food that at the end we're told that they took up 12 baskets of fragments of food. God is bigger than all of your problems. That's our thought for today.